This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
I don't want to have anything to do with God if this is how it pans out. But then I think as I went through, and I probably learned this in part at that point in time, but also as I've progressed through my life, is that I don't have to understand everything and still be able to accept that there is a loving God. I mean, if I understood the why of everything, then I would have no reason for God.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells a story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 54, Kelsea Clingeleffer. Kelsea has spent her life helping people. It seems it's in her very DNA. She used the money from delivering papers as a teenager to sponsor a child in need overseas. And since then, her generosity and compassion has simply grown. She's worked in the United Nations in Cambodia, studied how Taiwanese Buddhists cope in major natural disasters, and she's currently the International Project Coordinator for Disaster Management with Baptist World Aid, working in crises all over the world. And Kelsea, it's an honour to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, stop it. It's an honour to be here with you on the podcast today.
Kelsea, as children, I feel like our world can be really quite small, but from a young age, you were always thinking outside of yourself. Where do you think that came from?
Look, I was very blessed to grow up in an absolutely amazing family where I don't think that this was necessarily explicitly taught, but more modelled. And recently when I did start my latest position with Baptist World Aid, we realised that my mum was a Baptist World Aid supporter because her mum was a Baptist World Aid supporter. And so it goes back for decades. And so we recently did a story, and it was amazing to hear how seeing the world as a bigger place was modelled to my mum from her mum, from little old Tasmania. And so my grandmother had always sponsored children for many, many decades. And then my mum started when she first got married. And so we just sort of had that mindset was always modelled to us, which was really beautiful. And then in terms of the world actually being a bigger place, and especially coming from Tasmania, which is a little bit more disconnected, a little bit smaller communities, I had lots of aunties who travelled, and as well as just being part of a church community, I think that sort of helps you see that it's not all about you. And that's just such a beautiful thing. And I think it's just such a privilege to have that modelled for you from such a young age and have parents who support you when you say, hey, let's do a Sunday morning paper round at 6 a.m. every Sunday. But we can't drive. Please take us.
Our parents the best.
I know. They're so good.
Kelsea, you by no means had an easy childhood. I mean, you've painted it as somewhat idyllic. I'm kind of jealous that I didn't grow up in Tassie right now. But what were some of the events that shaped you early on?
Look, I think my actual sort of childhood period was sort of fairly straightforward, fairly typical, fairly normal. And then until I was about 12 or 13, and then we had like a 6-week period over summer where everything that could possibly go wrong did go wrong all at once, which as a 12 to 13-year-old, like that's a pretty critical time if you're just figuring out grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, like that really critical period in the middle. And I guess the first big thing that sort of happened was all out of the house one day, and it was taking our dog to the vet a couple of sort of towns along. And then we were coming back and thought, gee, that's a lot of smoke coming out from that hill. and then sort of came up the hill and then realised that the smoke was coming from our house, and then turned up, saw the flashing lights and realised that our house had burnt to the ground in the time that we had been away. So I guess that sort of became quite a critical point in my life in terms of, I feel like sometimes in life you have before and after moments, those major moments in your life that everything becomes before or after. And even the way we talk about it as a family sort of has that connotation to it. And it can be as simple as, do we own an egg slicer? Like, was that before the house fire, or was that after the house fire? Which I know is just like a trivial component of it. But like so much of our life has become sort of around that point. But then that sort of led into this 6-week period where that was November, and by the end of January, like our dog had gotten really sick. One of my best friends moved away. My grandfather had a really serious heart attack, and which probably should have killed him, but didn't. And then my parents' best friend dropped dead at 32.
Oh.
So it was just like this 6-week period of just your entire world has just gone from being absolutely normal to not. We lost pretty much everything through the house fire, but we all came through it unscathed, and they did manage to rescue all the family photos. To this day, no one quite knows how. They were on fire in a burning box, flooded, but somehow we got all the family photos out. I think sort of everything that happened after that put it into context. Like, we had an amazing community that got around us, and we were so blessed in being given accommodation and then helped to find a rental. I remember we turned up to the rental and people had fitted it out with sheets and beds and the pantry and all. It was just an amazing experience. And then, I think some of the things that happened with those other people in our lives sort of put it all into perspective. So, it was a lot, especially as a 12, 13-year-old. I remember turning up to school and everyone had made these little posters because they were having a fundraiser for our family, which was just such a sweet thing. And trusting that people do want to do and what's best and do want to help you out sometimes when you need it.
Do you feel like you had to grow up? Like that was the point in which you became an adult?
In some ways. I'm the eldest child. So I think
Same.
being the eldest child, you've always got some of that connotation with it. That you're we joke about how I am the family manager. But I think in some ways it does sort of make you think about the bigger picture. But it also makes you think about your own faith, because you can't just go through that and then just be like, oh, yes, I have the same faith as when I was 6 years old and accepted Jesus at Sunday school. But you go, okay, how does a loving God fit with this world that I suddenly find myself in? And I think that's a journey. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But I think it forces you to make some of those decisions yourself.
How did that kind of manifest for you in those, months and years afterwards? Did you find yourself angry at God? Were you questioning him? What was the situation?
Oh, absolutely all of the above. I remember lying in this rental house that we had and with this purple wallpaper and this like little wallpaper strip up the top that was like love and little love hearts. And I just remember lying there and going, okay, if you're a loving God, then why has all of this stuff happened to me? And I just remember going, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with God if this is how it pans out. And I feel like that's a lot of people have that response. But then I think as I went through, and I probably learned this in part at that point in time, but also as I've progressed through my life, is that I don't have to understand everything and still be able to accept that there is a loving God. If I understood the why of everything, then I would have no reason for God. But I'm not going to ever understand the why of everything, but I would much prefer to be in a situation like that and know that there is a loving God who has a hope for the world and the world that I'm finding myself in than one that just seems chaotic with no purpose at all. Even if I can't emotionally rationalize that at the time, I'd much prefer to make that choice.
That makes so much sense. And a hard thing to have to wrestle with at 12.
Yeah, I'm not sure I necessarily came up with that answer then, but like it was the start of that journey.
Mm.
And I'm sure it will be a journey probably for the rest of my life too.
Yeah, that's the awesome thing about faith. We don't quite arrive. Kelsey, you also had, that kind of wasn't the end of the hardships. You also had some major health troubles as a teen. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so that was, I mean, all of that stuff was sort of grade 7 sort of period. And then we got to grade 9 and my parents were away. They'd gone overseas for a trip for a couple of weeks. So we're staying at my grandparents and my brother got the flu. And we're like, okay, fairly standard. Winter, you get the flu. And I got the flu. And I'd never had the flu before, but I'm like, gee, this thing is awful. And it sort of had the flu for a couple of days and then had the flu for a few more days and a few more days. And we sort of got to the 2-week mark where I hadn't moved off the couch and I could barely talk. I wasn't eating anything. And then we're like, yeah, this is probably not the flu. And anyway, Mum and Dad got back and we started going to doctors. And I mean, I wasn't going to school because I couldn't move. And started going to doctors and basically they tested everything that they could test under the sun and no one could find anything that was wrong. And I think that was probably the hardest bit of it, was knowing that something is quite obviously wrong, but not being able to find what it is. And so it meant that, I missed a lot of grade 9 and sort of had chronic fatigue sort of symptoms, but we couldn't put it down to that. It sort of was different to that. It also meant just as I went through my teen years, because it sort of continued on, like I would just constantly get sick from food and I would miss sleepovers and parties and all that stuff that you do normally as a teenager because of this unknown medical thing, which was, impacting my life. So, it was hard. And once again, we had to go back to that wrestle with God of, okay, what does my faith look like in the middle of this?
And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand with chronic illness is that you can kind of reach a conclusion in your own mind and then the cycle starts again and it's like, okay, I'm good with this. I am going to fight this. And then the next day it's like, I can't do this anymore. And it's just this constant battle. How did you kind of get through that, especially in the years where everyone's saying, these are the best years of your life. You don't want to miss out on anything.
Absolutely. It is a battle. And I think sometimes the hardest bits were when it felt really lonely in that battle because you're like, no one else understands what I'm going through because it's not like I've got a diagnosis of this and I can find these people or this and I can find these people. And so I think part of it was just that it could be really lonely and like my family were amazing and I had friends who'd bring over Tim Tams and stuff like that, which was amazing. But I think it sort of got to, it's probably like ahead a couple of years ago when we'd sort of gotten to a plateau stage of health and you sort of get to a point where you go, I can't do any more doctors. I can't do any more tests. I went, okay, this is the last specialist. So I went to this specialist and I'd sort of I'd figured out how to function in life by this stage, but I was still getting sick and all these things. And I went to this specialist and we did the tests and she said, look, we can't find anything still. And this is 12 years after I was first diagnosed. And I just remember sitting in the car and just crying because I was like, I don't have any more options of where to go with this. And I remember I went to a youth camp that I was helping lead, sitting down with the pastoral team and just being like, look, this is what's going on in my life. And one of them just being like, hey, we're here to stand with you even when you can't do that yourself. And I think that was just such a defining moment of being like, okay, I don't have to do it all the time. Sometimes you need those other people who've got the faith and the hope to stand in the gap for you when you don't anymore. Yeah, which is amazing. And I think that was a real turning point in a lot of things. And we have figured out some answers for bits of it and to help me sort of more functional. And I live a fairly normal life now. But yeah, I think once again, it comes back to that having those people around you, even when you can't do it yourself, I think is really important.
Agreed. So important. Now, Kelsey, moving back a little bit, after school, you moved away to study psychology. You wanted to be a neuropsychologist, which even just hearing those words are like, there is just so much about the brain. It would be so difficult. Was this in part due to your own health issues that you experienced, trying to almost, I don't know, want to work in the field or find answers for others? What was the thinking behind that?
I think overall it was actually just more a fascination with people. And I don't know if that was actually more part to do with growing up just surrounded by different types of people. But then also finding the one, like the brain is just the most incredible creation. And I think finding those things that wow you and awe you is just such an amazing moment to be in. So that was probably, and I'd always known that I wanted to be a psychologist. Like I can't tell you the point that sometime in high school I was always going to be a psychologist, and I remember my friends being like, "We'll lay down on the picnic tables and you can ask us what's wrong," or like I remember some of them going, "Can you read our minds?" And I'm like, I don't know. I never really utilised that and told them that I could, and that would have been great fun though. Yeah, so I think I'd always wanted to be a psychologist, but then neuropsychology just was such a fascinating field. And the fact that there's all these things about the mind and how humans work that we know, and then so much more that we don't know. And I'm just like, that is brilliant, that regardless of all the tech that we're creating and all these amazing advancements, there's still some things that we go, really know why that happens. We just accept that it is, and your brain does that and connects to that, and I'm like, I love that. I love that. Yeah. So that's what originally fascinated me in neuropsych. But in saying that, my neuropsych lecturer, after doing some lab work with some brains, was like, you can't ever become a neurosurgeon, because I was way too fascinated with the brains and stuff, whereas everyone else was like, and I'm like, whoa. He's like, yeah, too much commitment, too much excitement.
You'd be too excitable, a surgeon, and be like, it's time to end the surgery. I just want to keep looking at this brain for a bit longer.
Can we do some more?
All right, so you were fascinated by neuropsychology, you were doing your degree, and then a trip to Japan completely changed the trajectory of everything. What happened?
Exactly. Well, the way that the psych degrees work is that basically you do your 3-year degree and then you do a 4th year, which is called your honours year. And as part of that, you do a thesis where you look at some sort of research project. So I was like, great, we've got this amazing neuropsychologist at the university. And then in my 3rd year, he left. I was like, excuse me, you were my career plan. How dare you go on to bigger and better things? But at the same time, we also had one of the lecturers mentioned, hey, I've got a free trip to Japan for 4 students coming up. You just have to enroll in this other class. And I was like, okay, well, all my career plans are out the window anyway. And who doesn't want a free trip to Japan? So I enrolled in this class. And the trip to Japan was 3 weeks talking to communities about how they were impacted and recovered after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. And I got there and was just like, whoa, whoa. And I think the things that wowed me about neuropsych, I think this was just a different type of whoa, a different type of awe, because it's just incredible. Both the sheer scale and force of what can happen, but also the way that communities can respond to that. And I just remember getting back from this trip and then just going, okay, saying to my lecturer, I'm in, let's do stuff. Part of it is also like a 21-year-old going, let's travel the world. Like, I want to get into a field that lets me just go explore and go crazy. But yeah, also just falling in love with the whole world of emergency management and emergency response, and just seeing the brilliance of humans in that as well.
So you'd made up your mind. It was all happening. You'd half convinced your parents. But God had a little bit of a change of plan. He's like, hold up a second, as he always does, which is really annoying.
Yeah, that's a good summary of what happened. So I'd done my honours year, and that was when I'd sort of spent some time in Taiwan working with Buddhist first responders and looking at how they coped with major disasters, which is just such a cool experience. And I was like, great, this is what I want to go work in. Like, thinking through this, I'm 22 at the time. And so you know what you're like when you're 22 and you're like, I'm going to save the world and I'm going to just fix everything, and I've got like all these brilliant ideas which are going to be so revolutionary, and I'm just going to go bombarding in. And then I had my pastor approach me and was like, hey, we've got a youth pastor position coming up for next year, and we know that you're finishing your degree this year. And I was like, oh, thanks. Like, I'll have a think about it. Inside, I'm like, I'm going to go do my master's and then I'm just going to go save the world. And anyway, then God started speaking to me about this youth pastor position. And it's hilarious because when I was like 14, 15, I'd wanted to be a youth pastor. That was what I'd wanted to do when I was a teenager. And I'm like, that's my teenager dream. Excuse me.
I'm 22 now.
I'm 22 now. I've got big people dreams. Anyway, God had some words to me and we had some fights over that, and then I became a youth pastor because God won. And yeah, so I became a youth pastor for 3 years, and I am so glad that I did, because the things that I learned through that period, I just go, were so critical for what would come next. Like, I go, if I had gone straight into humanitarian aid, then I probably would have not been eaten alive, but probably would have just been like, oh, the world's a terrible place, I don't know what to do. Whereas like youth pastoring, first of all, teenagers, they keep you humble. Like, you learn that you can't save the world. God can save the world. You can't. And so your job is to love people where they're at, to listen to people's stories, make time for people, but also I think learning some of those other skills, like learning how to be resilient when all these things, different things happen to you, in whether it's in your teenagers' worlds or whether it's in your world as the youth pastor. I think, yeah, you learn some amazing resilience, but also working, like being a youth pastor, I had incredible pastors above me. And I think some of that learning, which I'd learnt a little bit growing up in youth group, but that was like a really dedicated time of learning, okay, what does it mean to be sitting under people and learning? What does it mean to be sitting under people and having them mentor and calling out things in my life and redirecting me? And I think sort of that real value of having not just a community of peers, but also a community of mentors who could speak into your life, I think was super valuable out of that point in time.
I think that's so important. And I feel like so many of us, we have, I think it's human nature. You know, you have these dreams as kids and teenagers, like, I am going to fix everything. Why hasn't this been done yet?
Exactly.
And then you realize it's actually a lot more complex than that. So, Kelsea, you started studying your Masters of Humanitarian Assistance remotely. You found yourself eventually on a plane to Cambodia.
Yes.
How? How did this even come about?
I think this is one of these just like you look back and go, that had to be a God thing. Because as part of my degree, I had to go to Melbourne and go to the uni campus for a couple of intensives. And there was one afternoon that I was over there and I thought, I'll just drop in and see the course coordinator, not even for anything in particular, but just to be like, hi. And he said, I know it's a long shot, but one of the other faculties over in health, they've got some internships going, but they close today. So you have to go find the lecturer that's coordinating it today. This is like 2:00 in the afternoon. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, all of a sudden I'm like emailing this person who I've never met before and being like, hello, do you happen to be on campus right now? So I go and meet her and she's like, okay, can you get me these documents? I'll give you till tomorrow morning. So I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, I'm scrambling to put together this application. And then a few weeks later, she calls me up and she goes, so a really weird question. I've been talking to this new person and they're looking for someone in a humanitarian aid degree who is willing to move to Cambodia and wants to work for the UN. Would that like potentially suit you? And I'm like, would it? Do you reckon? Yes, it would. And I just remember like dancing, like doing some weird like dance thing, being like, what the heck has just happened? Because the degrees in Australia are so small that I go, there probably would have been only a very small handful of us who were at the position where you go, you're ready to do your internship, you can move overseas and that want to work for the UN. So anyway, I jumped on a plane and moved to Cambodia.
So how was your experience over in Cambodia? Obviously, before COVID, what were you working on there? What was your experience like?
Yeah, so I was working for something called UNDP, which is the United Nations Development Program. And I was working sort of on early warning systems for disasters. So we had this big project helping both the ministry build the technology in order to be able to predict weather better, but then also being able to use that as well as other programs to help communities respond prior to a disaster and be more prepared. Yeah, so my job was a lot to do with going around to the communities and just talking to them and being like, okay, what's your experiences? What's working in this project? What's not working in this project? Cambodia is a fascinating place. I remember one training, we were doing some drought-resistant agriculture training and some cows turned up and ate all of our training props. And we're like, the cows have eaten the garden that we were about to use.
Well, that didn't work.
And then being in another drought training when there was a small flood. And we're like, this is so like counterintuitive. But no, Cambodia is an amazing place and just being in a place with such history is really cool.
That's awesome. In 2020, your internship turned into a paid position, but everyone else kind of packed up and left, obviously, COVID. But you actually chose to stay. Why?
It was a really, really, really interesting period because we were sort of in the UN space. We sort of realised probably the magnitude of what was coming, probably like a week before it sort of really blew up. And it was the start of the day had been absolutely fine and we just sort of thought, we're doing some of this work at home stuff. We better just see how this fits with our contract. So we had a meeting with the managers and by the end of the day, the conversations were, are we leaving within the next 7 days? Or like, are we terminating contracts? Can we keep so it was within 24-hour period, everything shifted. So I sort of think of those few weeks because there was about probably 8 juniors at the time. And so we were on a different contract type, which wasn't as stable as some of the other contract types. And so over those 2 weeks, suddenly our house became the hub of everyone just trying to figure out what is going on. So we had we had people just sleeping on our couch, and we had people calling home and people calling their ministries and people calling flights and all these things going on. And in the middle of that, I was like, okay, well, we need to make pancakes for enough for 8 people. We need to, like, we're just trying to figure out this crazy, crazy thing. And I remember Mum and Dad were such a blessing in that, because they said to me, look, we would love for you to come home, but we will also support you if you want to stay. And so that was such a blessing, because if I'd come home, all of a sudden everything that I had worked towards would have been down the drain. It would have been coming home to move back in with my parents, would have been fine, but just it would have suddenly everything would have been very different. And I understand that for a lot of people that is exactly what happened, and they had to process and grieve. Really, it was a grieving process. But I had conversations with our ministry, because I did work for the UN. They did provide a little bit of safety there, but it was really weird when you sort of looking at Flight Centre and suddenly there's one flight out and that's $5,000, and then you look at Flight Centre and suddenly there's no flights, and you're like, okay, we're here. This is it.
Mm-hmm.
We're just learning to adapt in whatever gets thrown at us in this country. And my boss had gone home for the weekend to Thailand, and I didn't see him for the rest of the year. And so our team became scattered, and we were just like, cool, we're just going to roll with whatever happens this year.
So how did your work change as well? Because obviously, the entire team was scattered. What was the COVID situation in Cambodia? Were you kind of COVID free for a while?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is for that first year, we actually were fairly COVID free, which was pretty amazing. So we actually had a great time. Like, we were sort of going on holidays and stuff still. We could still go to, so it meant I couldn't put anything on social media because I felt bad, because everyone back here in Australia is in lockdown. But because I was the only one in our team still in country, it meant that I actually did a lot more travel, because I was the one who could go see all these different things as opposed to splitting it around our team. And so obviously a lot of mask wearing in 42-degree heat. But yeah, I think you just adapt. We learned to adapt. And honestly, I had an amazing year, but my contract sort of came to an end at the end of 2020, and I thought, okay, this is not the time to be unemployed and overseas. And I remember going, okay, what am I going to do here? And I had a travel agent, and he said, okay, we can get you out in December. I was like, perfect, my contract will finish, I'll go home. And anyway, then one day we look at it, and that flight's gone. And we're like, oh, ooh. So anyway, I call him up, and he said, this is late October, early November. He said, there's one flight out next week. I would recommend getting on it. And I was like, okay. So anyway, we managed to wrap up a lot of my contract, and I'd managed to pick up another contract at the same time just because I was in country. And so I was sort of finishing off 2 contracts, sort of said goodbye to everyone in the space of a week, packed up everything and flew back to Australia.
So what did you actually do when you came back?
So at this point, I'd done my degrees. I'd had a couple of years' experience in the development world, and I wanted to move into the humanitarian world. But I sort of had to make the compromise of going, okay, coming back to Australia, particularly Tasmania, probably not going to get a whole lot of work in that space. How can I still be working towards my career, and then paying my bills may be a completely separate thing? So I just went, look, I'll get whatever job. So I was ready to get a job in a supermarket or anything, and then ended up getting a job as a tour guide on a steam train in the remote west coast of Tasmania, and absolutely loved it. I just got to talk to people all day and tell stories and serve them scones and coffee. It was great.
That's amazing. Obviously, you didn't stay there. You're still not working on this steam train. You're now working at Baptist World Aid, and it was actually a research partner that found this job for you in the first place?
Yeah, so there'd sort of been 2 compromises when, for me coming back, was to keep working towards my career. I was freelancing research alongside with a colleague out of Queensland, as well as joining the SES State Emergency Service to help sort of build some of those local skills. But yeah, he sent me a message one day, and not a Christian, but he sent me this message about this job posting with Baptist World Aid and sort of said, I think you need to apply for this. And I was like, I looked at it and went, I am not qualified or experienced enough for that. But he's like, just do it anyway. Just do it anyway. Next thing you know, I did an interview and I was like, I feel like that went okay. And then they called me and said, we want a second interview. I was like, oh. And then I remember I was doing peony picking over the summer, sort of in between things. And then they called me up on the way home from peony picking and being like, we want to offer you the job. And I was like, oh.
That's amazing.
And yeah, so I started 1st of February last year and have been on the disaster management train ever since.
And I was going to say, thinking about the major world events that have happened since early last year, it's been 100 miles an hour for you ever since?
Absolutely. We often joke that I started on the 1st of February and then Ukraine happened on the 24th of February. So that's one way to learn the processes, is just straight on into huge, massive response. Then my colleague started this year to join our team and she started a week before Turkey, Syria. So, nothing like on-the-job learning.
Have you had a lot of travel with your job? What does your role itself actually kind of entail?
Look, my job sounds very glamorous, but we often describe it, it's more like, in some ways, glorified admin, like a lot of just spreadsheets and budgets and working with partners and stuff. But the real crux of my job is that I get to be the steward of between the Australian public and the Australian churches which support our causes, and then our partners who they're the ones who are doing all the work. And I just basically get to make those two hold hands.
Obviously, it's a challenging role. But what has been maybe one of the biggest learning curves, steepest learning curve in a job like this?
I think just the pace at which things happen. It's the pace of trying to get a response up and running, and trying to balance between partners who are going, because that's the thing, is our partners are often in the communities themselves. So the partners themselves have just been through this earthquake or this volcano. So they're just trying to figure out what's going on. And we want to be like, okay, hey, how can we support you? 'Cause sometimes they're like, okay, right now we need shelter and we need food and we need health. They're like, okay, cool. How can we help you guys to make this happen? Other times they're going, we can't even get to this affected village. We need you guys to can you come back to us in 2 weeks? So we're like, okay, great. So then we'll pivot, and in the other side of it is gathering information and being like, okay, how can we inform the Australian church and the Australian public and whoever's interested in what's going on here? And that's a whole lot easier when the media is paying a lot of attention to something. So in that very initial stages, everyone's like, oh my goodness, what's happening with Ukraine? What's happening with Syria? What's happening with da-da-da-da-da? And that is super valuable because it gives us sort of that momentum. When there's humanitarian crisis that aren't being paid attention to in the media, our job can be like, hey, how do we advocate for this? How do we support this? What are our partners saying is happening on the ground? How can we engage with this and sort of steward that relationship the best that we can?
That's so interesting, because I think we're all kind of at the mercy of the news cycle, especially as consumers. We only know about what is put in front of us. But how can we more meaningfully engage with global news stories beyond what's put in the headlines?
I think one of the biggest things, and this is even for me, and this is the world that I work in, is that you can't engage with everything, and being okay with the fact that you can't be across every single thing that is happening. But so often we go the other way. And I think it's just human nature that when we get overwhelmed, we then do nothing. And so it can be very easy to go, oh my goodness, this big thing is happening and all these people are hurting and I don't know what to do. And in that, I would just say, look, engage with what you can. And maybe you go, okay, I can financially give to this, or maybe go, okay, I can't financially give to it, but how can I pray for this? Or how can I learn more about this? And there's some amazing resources like Relief Web, which will give constant updates of things that are happening around the world. But also be willing to ask questions. And that's one thing I love when I get to go along with our church team and visit churches and different events. And the questions that people ask, they're like, hey, what's going on in this place? Or what are you guys doing to respond to this? Because even if I don't always have an answer to it, go, hey, okay, yeah, actually that is something that I should be asking that question too. And so I think, being willing to ask the questions and not always know what the answers is okay. Because sometimes there's things that are happening in the world that there aren't answers for.
How do you reconcile that? You see so much pain and hurt in your job, but also, as you said, you volunteer with the SES. You're seeing need on home soil as well in that disaster response. How do you kind of reconcile that human suffering that is so prevalent with a loving God?
I think the core of it is, and I don't necessarily have a great answer to that question, but I think part of it's coming to peace with the fact that I don't necessarily have a fix-all answer to that question, but acknowledging that we live in a broken world. Like, the world very clearly isn't the way it was designed to be. And we see that in the news, we see that on our social media, we see it in our own lives. But in the midst of that, I'd much rather have a hope in a God who has some control over that, as opposed to just living in chaos and going, everything is hopeless. I'd much rather have a God and go, hey, there is a God who is bigger than all of this. And does that mean I have to understand why bad things happen? Absolutely not, because there's some things that I will just never make sense of in this world. But if we focus only on that, then that becomes a very bleak place to exist from. But in saying that, I think sometimes we see all the bad stuff and we think that we're meant to be just happy and joyful regardless. But I think there's definitely a place for being angry about a situation, for grieving, whether that's for a big global disaster or whether that's something personal that's happening in our lives. And we get confused with the word, like the joy of the Lord and being happy all the time. But I mean, we see it in Ecclesiastes that there's times for mourning and there's times for rejoicing, and there's different seasons. And so I think being willing to journey through those different seasons and understanding that there is brokenness and actually responding appropriately to it. Absolutely, there's times where I go, okay, cool. I need someone else to step into that space with me, whether it's a counsellor, whether it's just a colleague, whether it's something like that. Absolutely big supporter of having people, especially professionals like counsellors and psychs, who can help you in spaces sometimes when you are feeling just so overwhelmed by something. That's a sort of a very long answer to your question.
No, I love that. I think that's a great place to end on, actually. I think people will take a lot from that response. Kelsea Clingeleffer, it has been an honour to have you on Finding Hope today. Thank you so much for generously sharing about your job, but also your journey of faith and life, and it's just been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been such a delight. Thank you for letting me chat up with you, and look forward to talking again.
Thank you so much to Kelsea Clingeleffer for generously sharing her story today. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to Finding Hope today. To help this podcast reach more people, you can rate, review, subscribe, and share it with a friend who might need a little extra hope right now. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. John chapter 16, verse 33. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.